going to give you a little preview of the gallery before Anne comes on. Welcome everyone who's just joined. Just waiting a few moments for others to join before we get started. A little preview of the show. In just a moment, Anne will be here. Get set up here. Welcome, everyone. We're just about to start. Thank you for tuning in. All right, Anne, I think we're good. Let us know if you can't hear us or if the audio is not working. Please leave a comment. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for joining us this evening. So glad you can be present here in the gallery. I'd like to introduce you to some of my work that's here and take you on a tour of the gallery. I've been very pleased to be included in this show that Lisa Morrow, the owner of the gallery, has put together. She's done an amazing job of curating work that I've never seen in conjunction. So she's taken work that she found in my studio, and her eye has found a certain rhythm or harmony and movement in all of them. So I'm excited to be here. She's here for 2 more weeks, actually. The show will be here. So hope you can get by, but if not, it's just really a delight to have you here on Instagram. So I'm Ann Holsberry. My work is inspired by my connections with nature. I make much of my artwork in the outdoors, and that experience just really deepens my connection with the ecosystem, with the systems around me. I'd say my work is really a celebration of the natural order of things. I'm often working in conjunction with the forces of nature, and I'll tell you a little about the process I'm using. I use mixed media in my work, and I'm often interested in working from the macro to the micro. I'm really looking for the unseen energies that move the universe, and I think the connections in nature really help me explore that in the different media that I use. My background is as a painter. I was classically trained as a painter, and you'll see that probably in a lot of the work I do, but I'm using a lot of experimental media right now. One of the main things that I'm using is an alternative photographic process called cyanotype, and I'm really using it in some ways that I'm pushing the limits of the material by working very large and a lot of experimental ways. And it's, well, maybe just to tell you a little about what it is. It was invented at a time even before cameras, so it's taking UV sensitive material. It's an emulsion that I put on paper or on canvas, on different paper or canvas mainly. And I do this in the darkroom and then take them in the outdoors to expose in the sunlight. I often use materials that are in the surroundings. I'll use plant or other kind of materials. Sometimes I can build up the emulsion in ways, so I'm always kind of splashing and painting with it in the dark room. And then
Should we take a look at some of the cyanotype artwork?
Sure.
Okay.
So some of these, you can see when I place something white on top of, or rather some plant on top of it, it leaves a white shadow. And it might be just 20 minutes for an exposure. Though some of these were done, this one in particular, the other one, Adrift at the end, were done more like 18 to 24 hours because they were a wet process. And so I covered them with glass. I had them in the forest sometimes. They were developed in moonlight, sunlight, just over a period of time, and then done on paper, which I put on panel, and then they've been covered with wax. This particular series that I've been working on is called Earth, Sky, Water, and I've really been exploring the delicate interconnections in nature. And in particular, I've enjoyed working near bodies of water. Some were dipped into the water, some were made on the beaches or near bodies of water. I've really been exploring kind of the connections with the forces in nature, the elements. It's the sunshine, sometimes it's the wind, different kinds of ways that I'm collaborating with nature to make them. And after the exposure, I often take them back into the studio to add other elements to them. Sometimes there'll be paint or additional wax. On this particular one, I first exposed it in sunlight. It was kind of pale, and I'm always surprised by what comes out. I'm working in the dark, often under a tarp or arranging things. This was some of the sea plants that I found, seaweed basically. And it was pale and kind of strange. And so I went back in and I painted with more of the emulsion and threw some sand on it, and the next day I also printed more seaweed, so you can see the darker areas of what emerged from it.
It's a surprise often, right? What it turns out to look like.
It's a total surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes I really don't like it, and then I look the next day and it's like this total new avenue that's opened up. So that's actually one of the things I enjoy a lot about my artwork, is always the surprise and moving on to something different. I've also really been more and more engaged with things that I'm finding at the edge of oceans and the whole ecosystem that is so important right now. The offshore ecosystem with the large sea kelp is in an endangered situation with ocean warming, and it's really captured my passion. I grew up on beaches. I'm a beachcomber, swimming teacher kind of person, and beaches are very important. And over recent years, I've become really aware of what's happening in these very important sea kelp beds, which are habitat for all kinds of other species, as well as being very important as carbon sinks. I have a background in environmental advocacy over many years, and I've become increasingly aware of these issues. So they're also very large, and so I've been working very large with some of these pieces. I mean, they grow to 50 to 60 feet in the wild, so that's really inspired me to work large as I'm trying to document them.
Yeah, you have this piece over here that is especially large, the sea kelp piece on silk.
Yeah, and I've been working on silk with some of these, and you can see it really captures a sense of time in the movement, and also time in the recording the sea kelp. I've worked actually very large with some of these. I was commissioned by the David Brower Center to make a very large one, which was wonderful. I made the height of their ceiling about 20 feet. And I've really been expanding my limits both physically also the limits of the material by making these very large ones. There's kind of a passion about doing them as it becomes harder and harder to find the kelp, and it's also invisible. I'm really trying to make these ecosystems more visible. There's a show actually that Lisa Morrow has been helping with also. She's a busy lady. She put this show together, and then there's my show at 555 California Street, where I have some of my largest works to date. There are these large 10-foot sea kelp pieces and some other large canvases that I actually made on the beaches, and then I've added embroidery. So there's quite a bit that I'm doing with this right now.
And that's at 555 California Street in San Francisco?
Right, yeah. That's that location in San Francisco. So.
And that's also on your website, the address.
Yes, and how to make an arrangement to get in there to see the work. It's, you need to just make an appointment to go in evenings, anytime on weekends, to see that work, yeah.
Anything else you'd like to talk about with the Earth, Sky, Water series before we move on?
Just, I guess it's about the power of the ocean, but it's also about the fragility. There's that mixture that really touches me very deeply. I'm recording things, maybe it's a sign of what we're losing. I don't know, there's just a very deep emotional connection I have with doing this. So I continue to work, and the immersive quality is very important to me. I love making things larger than myself. And then when they are shown together, people often report feeling some kind of being in touch with some kind of immensity, or a person was in here at the opening and she said, I feel like I'm floating in space. And I love that comment because often the immersive quality is very important to me.
Some users are asking about questions, and yes, please feel free to ask any questions as they come up. Just type it in a comment in the chat. And we do have one question that's, what kind of fabric is being used in this artwork?
So in this piece, it's silk.
Silk?
It's a fairly fine silk, a mummy silk, so I get that translucent quality. I can also transport it more easily. It's just, it kind of fits the subject. So I'm often working in the middle of the night to coat the silk because it's not certain where I'll find the sea kelp. So when I find it, then I go back into the studio and prepare the silk, and I can transport it to some place where I brought the kelp to print. I've also used canvas, so that's a whole different experience where I've dipped those into, I guess those are the two main fabrics. I mean, I'm wearing something that was a collaboration with a fashion designer. It's on silk, but this was a whole different process of taking some of my botanical design to put it on silk and cotton.
Right. Should we move on to some other pieces now? Could talk about your piece back here.
This one, Todos Santos. I made this when I was traveling. Travel is one of my inspirations in the work I do. I was in Mexico, and this is a kind of paper I take with me, that I can use to print things on. And so I printed it, and then I bring it back to the studio after I return, and I was able to sew it together. I really love the embroidery, the stitching process. It somehow is a very satisfying thing for me. Actually, homage to my grandmother in a way who could make anything with a needle and thread, so I love working on it. I also added some parchment paper that I find in flea markets. I embroidered and used ink in it, and then old botanical pages, so they become kind of a piece in themselves, but it's really inspired by my travel and the ease of traveling with some of these papers that I use.
We have another question about cyanotype, if I can pause you. This person asks, when I have tried cyanotype on paper, the blue color seems to fade after a while when exposed to light. How do you prevent this?
Let's see. It's important what paper you're using. Sometimes I can geek out about paper, or you can email me about that. I like to use 100% cotton paper. Also, these are sort of living and breathing, and sometimes if you take cyanotype into the dark, it will refresh itself, and then you put it back out in the light. So that's one way that it adjusts. I mean, I've seen cyanotypes that were made by Anna Adkins, the first woman, we call her the first woman photographer, who was making British algae cyanotypes out on the seacoast. I've seen her work in the British Museum, and it looks like it was made yesterday. So there's not a fading process. Sometimes it's about the relationship to sunlight, or taking it in the dark for a while.
So you can take a faded cyanotype, place it in the dark, and it
That's
will
one of the
darken.
things that's recommended. Yeah, there are other elements that may be going on, and I'm not sure if this person who wrote me today, I may know you, or if you want to email me about your situation. Those are two suggestions. Just put it in the dark for a while and then see how that turns out.
Well, let me, if I can, just get a zoom in on this Todos Santos, get some of these details. There are some nice ones here. This is the parchment paper you were talking about.
Right, parchment paper this would have been maybe 17th century. I buy this in the flea markets in Paris. This is one of my real inspirations. I'm sort of nomadic by nature, and I travel a good bit to Europe. That's part of my whole process. And I found this in flea markets there. You know, it's the animal skin that was used for writing prior to paper.
And then I personally love these embroidered bits. Where was this from, this leaf?
So these were from the old cemetery. It was after the Day of the Dead in Mexico, in Todos Santos, and things had just been swept into piles. It was a good bit after Day of the Dead, and so I picked up some of the leaves that I put in there. Yeah, there are two of those leaves in there. These are botanical prints from an old French botanical book.
We have another person asking, does the length of the exposure to the sun affect the depth of the blue color?
It can be important, yeah. The longer the exposure, sometimes the darker the blue. Sometimes you have to just judge. I use a UV meter at times just to see what I'm dealing with. You can try different things to see what you like. I'm not a photographer, so I'm not approaching this as a photographer sometimes would, where they're very precise on the exposures. I will often just kind of see what I like. Sometimes I've overexposed things, and I think I've ruined it, and then I'll go back and I can find all kinds of macro, micro kind of objects in it, and then I start working on it. So I'm an experimenter. It's a voyager's journey, you know, kind of an experimenter's journey in what I'm making.
Should we talk more about another body of work from more inspiration of your travels and whatnot?
My travels have been important to me as far as my inspiration. These were some of the botanicals, and some of this work I was inspired by my trips to Europe, and also I was real fascinated with the walls and old chateaus and cathedrals. So I started using layers and layers. Here I was doing more painting and printing, and I would sand and see what I found in there. And really, the subject, the objects would start to emerge from this. I was particularly inspired also by the work of the Nabis, Bernard Guillard, the symbolist Redon has been inspiring me since I was a teenager. I feel like they were in touch with some sort of primordial sense of nature, which I love to capture. But they were also inspired by Japanese art, sort of the movement of the whole Japanese kind of inspiration but absorption into French culture. So I feel that there's that inspiration in here also. And so those works are often on panels, on screens, and I've done them in certain ways that they can all fit together or be used singly. You can see in some of these also, like the rocks and the other pieces that I come back and work on at times, I've looked at the way that French artisans are using gold leaf, and I've incorporated some of that into this work.
I'm trying to get that gold shine on these. It's hard to capture on camera, but that is gold. Gold leaf. There it is. A little shiny.
Even though I'm working with rocks or plant shapes, I think there's always something about the sublime in nature. I call some of these, they were from between worlds, or a space where the energies are not visible, but I'm always dealing with those kind of issues, or it's what fascinates me, what I'm searching for in some of these. The one little bird's nest. I love working with the bird's nest because I guess of what they represent. They're these enclosed, very safe, intricate spaces. I really study them and do this whole meditative drawing process. I have a whole collection of nests, and then people have started to give me nests because they know I draw them. So I've loved kind of what they represent, but also just that way of following the line and then the process of applying wax to them. So there's a lot of different media that I like to use and experiment with.
Yeah, is this one, this is encaustic, is that right?
That's encaustic that's over it, yeah. That's a heated beeswax process that I've applied to some of these. Some I've used cold wax. This particular one has encaustic on it, which is beeswax and a mixture of rosin from trees, so it all combines, at a high temperature, and that can cover, give it a covering, but also that translucent quality, which I love a lot. Sort of like seeing behind the layers, that you can look in there and see.
I'm going to get another close-up of these nature studies pieces. You can see the different layers you're talking about there.
Yeah, it was really a process of just finding the shapes once I had sanded into it and then started building layers. And I love doing that, just finding what appears in the shapes. And it's very much the way the old faded walls and the old cathedrals look. You're seeing layers and layers of time, and what appears, what's been rubbed away, what's been painted over. I like that process. when I was an art teacher years ago, I used to sometimes get the children to work that way, to make just sort of a colored mixture, and then they would start to find the parts in it that they could turn into something. It actually helps contact the unconscious or the unknown, which is a very important part of my work to me. Kind of that freedom to go into the unknown and then see what emerges.
We have a question about kelp, but maybe we can answer that in a moment after we focus on these, but I just want to make note.
And then some of the botanical pieces here, I'm back into the cyanotype again. These were made in the way of, making the blue cyanotype, which is really important to me. I mean, I love the exploration of blue that I'm doing. These were actually soaked in bleach and then soaked in tannin, either tea or coffee, to get this color. And it's so interesting that Lisa's placed one of the cosmologies here in the middle, which just perfectly fits in, I think, because it's also got embroidery and it's just the swirly chance operation of what I've printed that I then begin to work other media into it, like the embroidery that I've done.
Yeah, the embroidery is very special in these ones, I think. A little glittery thread. What inspired you about these botanicals?
Well, the botanicals are similar to this process in a way. I mean, it's a dependence on water. The plants have a dependence on sunlight. I feel like there's this connection with the whole process, the natural process in nature. And then I love to collect old botanicals. I've also found those in the flea market, and then I bring them back and use them in a new way that I am inspired by the older botanicals. In this one that's next to it, in this cyanotype one, it incorporates a lot of the different elements. There's the botanical. It was also something that was sort of like a throwaway practice piece, which is sometimes my best connection with the work. I was just trying out some different things on some pieces of paper. I bleached a part of it and then added the pink, which became a botanical there. I call it night bloom, and something about the blooms, the botanicals, just really appealed to me. And then all the little cosmologies that started appearing. And it feels like it brings together a lot of what I'm interested in.
Another question while we're on these embroidered pieces. What is the significance of the embroidery in these pieces?
It could be a lot of different levels. I call it emotional sewing. My grandmother tried to teach me some of the regular stitches, and I found I wasn't that interested. What I really like is just somehow feeling my way into it, and so they're significant in that way. Sometimes it just feels like there's a deep healing that goes on. Sometimes in the stitching things together, it's like stitching the world together. Sometimes I don't have words for it, but it's very satisfying to me to do this. And sometimes it's just fun, very playful, what I'm doing. So, I think it connects me too with women's work in a way. Women who've really been doing this kind of work so much, and they're really taking more space now. I love that fabric is becoming kind of more an art form. These also connect me with some of the women who've just done it in their own homes, but then I love bringing it into the artwork. It just means a lot to me personally to be using the stitching connections in my own life, and then how I connect with through the ages, it feels like, in some way. Through my own lineage, my own
generations of embroidery.
Generations, yeah. Mm-hmm. Something about that.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, while the silk is behind you, maybe I will ask that question about the kelp. Can you describe the role of kelp in the ocean ecosystem?
Okay. Well, the kelp beds are very important because they are the natural habitat for a lot of different species. They're near shore, so they have a certain location. I mean, they grow in very wild and woolly places, so I'm often out there scrambling on rocks with help, of course. It's often a two-person job to just find it. But they're also very important carbon sinks. I mean, the whole ocean system depends on it, and they're endangered now because, well, there was a warming die-off of a certain kind of starfish that were the natural predators of the purple urchins. They're now these urchin barrens and along our coast in Northern California, where the kelp have been just decimated by the urchins that are eating them. So it's just a real loss as far as our whole ocean system, this one particular ecosystem, and it's one that's not often seen. There are attempts there are different restoration projects. There's one at Noyo Harbor on the north coast where I've done some of my work there. They're trying vertical ways to grow it, but it's pretty wild stuff. It kind of grows in its own habitat. So there are restoration projects going on.
And how tall do these kelp get?
Well, they can get to 50 to 60 feet in their natural habitat. So this is part of the reason that I've been working so large. I'm just trying to represent what they're really like in their own habitat. I can find these huge things, so I'm, with some help, can get them off the beaches long enough. Sometimes I can try to print on the beaches, but it's usually foggy and windy. I get them to dry land someplace away from a little ways, where I can get some sunlight, and trying the best I can. In fact, I want to make even larger ones, and the silk really allows me to do it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of this marriage of process and the material that I'm using, plus something in me that's really urging me on. I mean, I feel a certain urgency about doing this because of what's happening in our oceans, and I'm trying to just make that more evident.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really felt a turning point at the 2016 election when I just felt I wanted to do whatever I could to just make this more, just let my art be of service in some way. So I'm out there really working on this, but I have a love of being in the outdoors also.
Mm-hmm.
So it feeds me and it stretches my limits. And I'm making these that go into immersive environments so that people can get a sense of what it's actually like being in that kind of swimmy, underwater environment.
Yeah, it is pretty cool to stand beneath these and look up and feel like you're under the kelp in the ocean. Let's see, we have a couple more questions. I'm trying to multitask here. Let's see, let me set the camera down. So we have a question, is the purple urchin an invasive species? And then another question, how do you work with such large pieces out in the field?
The first about purple urchin as an invasive species.
Go ahead, yeah.
They are the invasive species. They're like moving digestive systems that are just eating these up, and there's not really a use for them. They're not really edible, so they're not, though I have seen people proposing recipes for using the purple urchins. So, anyway, yes, they're taking over because they're just eating through, and they'll often eat just the base of on the holdfast where where the kelp is growing. So that's a real problem, and it's caused by this multitude of things happening. The convergence of different things, the ocean warming, the die-off of their natural predators, and a lot of just what's been going on with our oceans. And the other question was?
How do you work with such large pieces out in the field? Maybe we can look at incoming tide while you talk about that, because this is a big piece.
The really large silk ones
Yeah.
out in the field. Like I said, I have help on these. I can roll things up and take it into the outdoors. On this particular one, this was a piece of cake compared to the really big silk ones. But this I could lay out. I have tarps, or I have a table sometimes where I can lay these things out, and then I plant them or weight them down, and I can put the kelp on top of it or whatever I'm printing. Once I have worked in the darkroom and covered it, on the really large silk pieces, like I said, I often work in the middle of the night, and then I can roll them up or put them on a surface, take it in the outdoors, making sure that I'm completely covered under a black tarp. It's a very physical operation because I'm under there, usually working in the dark and trying to put these big pieces on it, on the silk, and then anyway, it's stretching some physical limits in doing it, but I'm able to do that with help. And I think, I hope that looking at the size of them also gets people feeling viscerally what it's like to make these, what it's like to be engaged with it. These are questions that I love to have asked about it.
Yeah. And collecting this stuff too. I mean, there's all of the gathering that takes place and moving it to your artwork location, laying it out. It is very difficult.
That's a huge one. I know last year when I was commissioned to do a large piece, I spent about a week on the North Coast trying to find large pieces. It wasn't quite the right time of year. And then finally, with the help of some friends, I call it our Sea Kelp Sisterhood. They're people who are really in touch with this and all were sharing information. I found that maybe there were some on the coast down near Monterey, so went down there, made it a nice visit to the aquarium. This was before the pandemic hit, but was able to find what I needed. mean, it's very hard to find at certain times. Have to know the time of year, the tides. Usually they'll get washed in when they're big storms, so that's something that will bring them in. But I never really know exactly where I'm going to find them. So then I'm often in the middle of the night trying to prepare the silk that I'm going to print the next day. I can't just prepare it and plan to go out and find something. Yeah, so,
Spontaneous.
Hmm?
It's spontaneous.
Yes, very ad-lib.
Yeah.
Very spontaneous. And dependent on often my sweet husband who's out there helping me, my kettle wrangler, my tide watcher, my outdoorsman, helps me with. You yourself have been involved in one of my big printing projects where we had to find the 45 minutes of sunshine for that day, and then I had prepared it and then trying to find it's relates me to the elements. I have to collaborate with the elements on this, and sometimes they're big surprises. Yeah.
So we have about 15 minutes left. Would you like to talk about your cosmologies next? And then we'll see if we have other questions.
Sure, yeah.
And to people watching, please feel free to ask questions anytime. We're just taking questions as we go. So I'll zoom in on these for a little bit here while you talk about them. Please describe how your cosmology series came about, or your inspiration behind these.
Right, I'm inspired in these by the sacred geometry of the universe, by star charts, by comparing small objects I find in nature, looking for some kind of connection with the large. They just are things I keep returning to because I love to work with those issues. I love the spatial feeling of them. I also like the minutia, that I can do this meditative mark making. So in some of these, I've done them with cyanotype again. This particular one, I then took it back to the studio once I had done the process of coating it and printing it in the outdoor sunlight. There was actually, I'd forgotten, on this one, there was a shawl that I had, a very translucent shawl that I printed in this. It's been a favorite thing to use over the years. And then I took off from that and started adding some different mark making, some real meditative marks, and I later saw this image, after I'd made this, in my Qigong practice and a meditation. There was this kind of universal image that came to me that was very much shaped this way. No idea what came from what, but I just love that entering a space where I'm not sure what's coming next, but the mark making has me in that space I really love as far as making art. And
is the color in here also cyanotype, or is that paint that you put in the pink and the orange?
so those colors I added with ink. Yeah, and the gold dots, that's all ink that I've added. I'll often add ink and just do these very fine kind of filigree kind of shapes in something.
Someone's asking what the name of this piece is.
Sometimes it has a number, and then it has become emergence. which is what I think fits for me on this one. Something about something being born, I think. In my meditation, I was moving through this out into space. So anyway, it's also cosmology 9. So I have kept numbers, but the numbers, are kind of just as they emerge. I do a lot of different things with these. I sometimes think my art practice is like a spiral, and I'll do something and then move into something large, and then I'll come back and do a cosmology or botanical. It sort of moves around, and I find the next thing, often coming from the materials. I don't really plan some of these. This one, for instance, was printed. One of the things I love to use is some Mardi Gras beads that I have, and this one I've actually named Mardi Gras. I love to print them, and then you can see how they form these layers, and then I laid over it eventually some work I had done on Duralar, which is a transparent piece that was practiced for another piece, and all of a sudden it seemed to fit this one. So it's been stitched by machine to get this layer over it. And of course there's the ink again, all the pinks and the oranges. I'm particularly fond of pink these days. I'm trying to bring it into a lot of what I'm doing. So these are some of the more recent works of mine in the show, these particular cosmologies.
Look at this very pink one over here.
The very pink one is called Big Pink. For your people of my era would know what that's about, your rock and roll background. It's not cyanotype, but it is a UV sensitive material that I bought this, and it's also something that I could apply and put in the sunshine like for about 10, my journals tell me how long I've printed these, 15, 20 minutes. And then I started working with it again with the inks and adding more dots and more of the meditative mark making. So it's using this same color palette that I like a lot, the pink and the turquoisey color. And I'll often do these kind of little marks that are like networks. There's something about the networking vocabulary I love. They become almost like maps. I mean, maps are an important part of what I'm doing, that I've collected a lot of maps with my background in city planning. I was very interested in maps, and it's maybe one of the primary things that shows up in a way, that they're like a map to some geography or some, you can tell I lose words sometimes trying to describe the process, but anyway, it's part of what I'm doing with a lot of these, maps to the unknown or to unexplored regions.
Someone's asking about the structure shapes, which I believe are in this piece. I believe that's what you're talking about, those interconnected pieces. Are those embroidered or white paint or ink?
So those are ink, and it's on a translucent film that's called Duralar that you can put ink on. And I had actually been doing that. I'll sometimes put a piece over something I'm making to see what shapes I want to use. So this was lying around the studio. It was related to another artwork. Actually, it's related to, I'm just remembering, a piece that's now at UCSF in their Precision Medical Center that has all of these interlocking shapes in it. And so this was lying around, and then I put it over the print of the beads, and it just added a whole element that I really couldn't have planned. I like that it sort of lets me know what it needs. And so then I sewed it over there.
Mm-hmm. And then another person is wondering about these lumen prints right next to it, these pink
So
pieces.
a lumen print is another photographic process without camera. It's photographic paper, and it's also, I expose it in sunlight. Some people use other sorts of indoor lighting. And created more botanicals. Again, there's that floating quality that I love, and there are different kinds of paper. One is the warm paper, one is the cooler paper, which is the gray. And so I created these, let's see, when I was in residency at Kala, which is another one of my home bases in the East Bay, because it takes a dark room and then certain kind of dark room technique where you immerse it in some kind of wash that fixes it. I haven't done this on my own yet because I haven't set up all of that process, but they're still that very experimental photographic paper. I mean, there's some women who are real pioneers in this. I love the women who've done this kind of work of using photographic techniques, but in this very experimental way.
And are these plant pieces, these petals on here, the shapes, or?
Should I really tell you what they are?
You don't have to.
This is the leftovers from my lunch, which was, they were beautiful. I mean, pieces of slices of pear, the artichoke leaves, and so you can see some of the green. There are a few other things that are mixed in there, but I use what's in my environment, and I love that discovery. You know, that's kind of my name, I guess, you know, what I'm about. I love the surprises and the things that I can find in my surroundings. And I loved it, how the green color stayed with it. So
That's cool.
love the surprises. They lead to all sorts of new discoveries.
All right, we have 5 more minutes, and one person commented on the treasure maps on the other side of the room. Should we look at those before we wrap up?
Sure.
Head over there. All the places we've been so far. Duck under the silk here.
So the treasure maps were made basically from some of the old vintage maps that I find in flea markets in Europe. They're from the age of nautical exploration. They're also from a period of colonialization. So I'm in a way using these as a way to look at history, or maybe subvert that. I sometimes, first of all, let me back up. I make transparencies from those maps. So that means, you know, Xerox machine, put it onto transparent paper. In that sense, it's like a photogram. So then I can lay the transparency on my prepared paper. These look a lot like blueprints because it's kozo paper. It's very thin. And then I put all of those pieces from different kind of maps, French, and then here's something from another era. I'll turn them backwards so you can't necessarily read them. And then I also do a lot of embroidery. I just paint into them. I also add old papers that I found, like here's something from the 18th century that I put into them. So they're, and then encased like I've been pinned down, but it's like a tanka, the whole kind of Nepalese Tibetan paper that's wrapped around it. And then I've painted into them and added color, so they become treasure maps or something that's from a past time, but I'm bringing them forward in some way. And I love doing them also. It's very engaging to do this kind of, and the stitching on these in particular feels like it's going through the ages or stitching sometimes different continents onto these. And brings together a lot of what I love to do, this very intricate work. But sometimes when you're back, it looks like you're looking from outer space, but you're getting very close and you see the micro. So I also love working with that a lot, from micro to the macro.
All right, well that takes us to the hour. Is there any last thoughts or comments you'd like to add? Or if anyone has any final questions, this is the time to ask them.
Yeah. I'd like to say the show is here till June 13th. Is that right, Lisa? And Lisa's here, has this beautiful gallery. If you are in the area and would like to come by, you can come in and see the work. Would love to welcome you. I'll probably be here the last weekend at some point. And just want to say it's been a pleasure being here and being part of her art community that she supports so well.
All right. I'll do one more walk around, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm really happy that everyone's joined us, particularly wherever you are. I know some of you are in different time zones or different locations, and really appreciate your coming and being with us. It's an amazing thing that we can do right now to stay connected, and it's just so important for me to be able to share my work with you and have this time that you could come join us. Thank you so much for coming, for being part of this.
Thank you. All right.